Welcome, everybody. We will just dive into it. Yes, as Michael Wolf already indicated, you can use the chat throughout this. I'll stop at like a couple of periods here and peek in to kind of see what kind of questions and things come up, but let's dive into it. So thanks everyone for joining the talk on why technology teams, or any team really, should play tabletop role-playing games. So my name is Davin Kluttz. I'm going to make a case for why teams ought to try this out as an exercise if it's something that they haven't already done. And I think also, I think it warrants for those who may be attending who don't know what a tabletop role-playing game is or kind of curious about that. We'll dispel some like kind of myths and explain a little bit of concepts so we know what's going on. So yeah, again, I'm Davin. I'm a product manager at Integral. I have a background in design. I've been working in technology since the 90s, but I've been in software or some form of technology since 2007, particularly working in Agile. And I think that my history in playing tabletop role-playing games have really helped kind of build my skills. And I had this idea for this talk, and I did some diving into this a little bit more, and I realized there are a lot of analogs and some really interesting stuff, as well as a lot of research that I was able to kind of learn and incorporate into this to share with all of you today. So here's what we're going to cover. I'll go sort of some topics a little briefer than others, but each topic will take us a couple of minutes. I'll explain how sort of I got here, and I'll dive into what actually is a tabletop role-playing game, give you a really kind of brief history. There's tons of history out there that one could search on, but I'm not going to bore you to tears with too much of that. We'll talk about some objections and kind of misconceptions that people have about tabletop role-playing games, and we'll go over like some of the basic concepts, and then we'll talk a few topics really kind of related to how those concepts used in a game environment can help build skills with the team, and also have a lot of fun too in the process. We'll go over like some kind of next steps and resources, places to learn more, and then we can have some kind of Q&A at the end. So throughout, as I mentioned, you are welcome to post questions or comments in the chat. I'll dwell at a couple of points in the presentation where we can have a little bit of banter back and forth, and I can address things as they come up, or inputs and insights that you'd like to share. And then, yeah, when we get to the Q&A at the end, we can actually go on audio, and we can have a discussion there too at the end as well. But at the end, you can or throughout, make sure if you're posting a question in the chat that you switch it to everyone so that we can all see what your question is. If there's something specific to myself or the host, you can switch it to hosts and panelists, and you can send a direct message to any one of us. Cool. All right, so here's how I got here. I was an early computer enthusiast. I played around on a Commodore 64 way back in the 80s, and I didn't actually come into this type of game, like the example that I'm showing here is Dungeons and Dragons. What I actually came into it was early video games. This game that I got for my computer was called Ultima 3. I didn't even catch Ultima 1 and 2. But this game was very interesting. It came with a big rollout map. It came with these little booklets filled with spells and all kinds of different stuff in there. And there was kind of a peculiar language in this game where it was, having you go on kind of quests. It was showing a massive map in game of like places that you could go and explore. And it kind of piqued my curiosity. Now, of course, this is now, gosh, like 40 years later or so. We're pretty used to like immersive video games that have like entire worlds where you can run around and drive vehicles or steal vehicles or whatever your choices are. But at that time, we just had very little of that kind of interaction in a video game. They were all like pretty linear, you kind of like, they all kind of came out of games if you've seen something like Pong or something like that. But this was at a time where, color was even like the new thing for a few years. So, so this game I think this game came out in like 1983 or 1984. And then Dungeons and Dragons actually came out like, somebody just mentioned this. Dungeons and Dragons, I think, came out like 74 or 75, like very early sort of first edition of the game. But it was kind of being used by sort of hobbyists. It was very inaccessible, and it took a little while for it to mature. A lot of people got started like after 1981 was this kind of basic set where they kind of cleaned up some rules and that kind of thing and made it more accessible. And so I got this basic set because I was curious about what was going on in this video game. And it started just kind of a curiosity journey into like, what's going on here and what's going on there. I went to the bookstore and I saw these kind of funky dice that were available. I didn't have any friends that were kind of playing this. We didn't really have like the internet to go and discover it. And I realized like, oh, this is like a physical game. You can do stuff with this. It was kind of a toolkit really for telling stories. So let's go into kind of like the history. So that's kind of how I got into this. So I've been kind of doing this and playing around with these types of games for a while. So as I mentioned, this all kind of predated kind of video games. But the point that I wanted to mention here is that, in a video game, you can kind of, you have some boundaries, right? At some point in a particular video game, you hit a wall or something. These types of games don't entirely have that. And, if you think about the way that chance sort of plays, like if you're playing a video game or something and you, swing your sword or fire your gun or whatever it is that you're doing in a video game, there's always a chance that something will work or not work. So these games had like a set of kind of mechanics to kind of figure out whether something would pass or fail or not. So they had like dice typically to represent this kind of randomization that was incorporated into gameplay. So again, this predates sort of video games. And what some of the originators of games like Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop games, they were actually started off kind of playing war games where they would do these whole kind of big battle reenactments and stuff. And they had to come up with kind of rules for like, well, if you fired your cannon from this distance to that distance, what's the chance that it would hit the target under these conditions and those conditions? So they had all this kind of tactical sort of like underpinnings that came out of it. And the originators of like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, were Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. They were playing these miniature war games. And they said, well, what if we could go on kind of other kind of side quests and stuff? And what if we could play individual characters and do things? So this really just kind of evolved and spiraled into basically a way of storytelling. So Dungeons and Dragons is one that I'm mentioning, but like nowadays there's many different video games. Let's see, did somebody have kind of a question? Okay, just a comment there. Good comment, Anna. So there's many different games available now. I'm going to move something with my chat off on the side of the screen a moment. Got to arrange the interface. And of course, now we've evolved with all kinds of like kind of digital tools and apps and stuff that facilitate this. It's almost kind of a little bit of a confusing landscape. If you go sort of back in time a little bit, there were very few games like this available. And now there's like a whole lot to wade through. In some senses, it's pretty awesome. In some senses, it can be overwhelming for someone new to this type of game or hobby. So let me just dive into kind of a little bit of a definition of what this is. Now, I will say this is like a whole category of gaming. So the way you might think of a card game is different than maybe like a board game or even just a video game or something. It's really kind of its own genre. And at the roots of it, in any tabletop role-playing game, every player in the story plays a role. right? You're playing a character in a story with friends, and it's in a game. It's given a game structure where there's a couple of rules. In most tabletop role-playing games, players just describe their actions verbally. There will be a set of rules that indicate whether something sort of passes or fails. And players generally have to improvise the things that they want to do. It's because of this that oftentimes we have one player in the game. This isn't the case with every role-playing game, but there's usually one player in the game that will play kind of a referee, or what some games will call a game master, or in the game of Dungeons and Dragons will be called the dungeon master. Somebody to basically adjudicate these sets of circumstances. And we do this so that, one, we give people absolute freedom to kind of improvise and come up with interesting solutions to problems in the game. And we kind of need a human to kind of like mediate that against the information that they have about what's going on in the world. So the human was sort of acting for many years, and still continues if you compare it to a video game. The human is sort of acting like the computer. We're also seeing more and more like evolution of a lot of tools that we'll talk about too, where computers are helping the dungeon master or the game master. But the player choices essentially shape the game's direction and the outcome of the story. Can play these type of games for any type of duration. Some games take less than an hour to play. Some games will take 3 or 4 hours to play. Some people will play these type of games in series, sort of episodic play, where they'll play the same, what a lot of people will call a campaign. They'll play them over and over, weekly or every other week, or whenever they go to the beach or whatever it is. So within the game, there's always like mysteries, puzzles, different social interactions and conflict. And I'll be using kind of some Dungeons and Dragons examples because it's probably one of the most popular role-playing games. And there are a lot of concepts that get borrowed into other role-playing games. So it's a decent one to kind of start, but it's by no means the gold standard for everyone. That particular game kind of usually fits into kind of a high fantasy genre. But there are all kinds of different genres that you can play in. You know, everything from, cyberpunk to horror, science fiction, all kinds of different things. There are even mentioned on here kind of like secret worlds. There are games where you can play bunny rabbits, and explore the secret world of rabbits. Let's see, somebody had a comment, Anna had said, in a video game, you can only do what is explicitly allowed or designed into it by the rules. In a real world game, including in game or sports, including tabletop role-playing games, you can do anything that is not explicitly allowed by the rules. Yeah, and actually that's a really good kind of concept. Like you'll have the boundaries of like the limits of whatever your game developer decided was going to be the boundaries of the game. And actually for a lot of video games and other kinds of games, those boundaries are really important for how the game is played. But something that's more open-ended like this, where the outcomes are decided by whatever people come up with, is a lot of fun and interesting. You can see some emergent things that happen out of this. So the one sort of thing to kind of mention before I kind of leave this sort of section is that wouldn't be intimidated. I'll talk at the end about a couple of different kinds of games that are available that range in complexity. So really don't be intimidated. Anyone can play this. There's role-playing games for all different ages and all different interests. I wanted to kind of go over this. There's a lot of like some objections and misconceptions that people have about these types of games. If you go into a store and you look at like a rule book for something like Dungeons and Dragons, they'll look like super thick, and somebody will go, I'm never going to play a game that has that many rules to it. The reality is the rules for that game are on one page. All the rest of the things are really just kind of references. Like I don't know, lists of different kinds of weapons or magic spells. And so if you have a character that does or doesn't do certain things, you're only going to reference a handful of pages out of the book. So there's really not that much rules to learn. And most of the stuff is structured in the game where you sort of acquire new information sort of progressively as you play. So yeah, some people have seen, D&D or something on Stranger Things and go, it's kind of a cool TV show, but that game doesn't really interest me. There's a lot of different ways to kind of play these types of games. The same way you might play a card game differently with different friends. It's just going to be a different situation. Some people like to actually get into their role and kind of do silly voices. That's never required. You don't have to be a voice actor to play these types of games. I'm not into Renaissance festivals or dressing up in sword fighting. There's definitely like a lot of stereotyping about the types of people that play these types of games. That is, historical reenactment and kind of in real life kind of role playing is a totally different thing than just sitting down and playing a game. No thanks, I've had enough hobbies. This does not mean that has to be your hobby. I'm super into it. It's kind of a hobby of mine, but it doesn't have to be a hobby of yours. I know people that played once or twice in their life and had fun. Somebody that played once and like, it's not for me. That's fine. It doesn't have to be your hobby. Again, stereotypes. All right, let's go on to sort of play structure. So somebody said actually Steph said, so many ways and games. Yes, super normal is one of my favorites, and it's one page and be taught by a group in 5 minutes. Only takes a 6-sided die. Yeah, so they're like super stripped down, simple pages, like simple games like this super normal one that Steph mentioned. It's just you grab a page, everybody reads over the rules really quick, and you just go. So it doesn't mean an enormous amount of setup. So I'm going to go over just sort of like basic structure, so we get sort of a flavor for like how this works for anybody that has never played. So players play characters, and you will generally have a sheet. Sometimes the sheet is literally like an index card with 1 or 2 quick notes. Sometimes it's represented by a card or something if the game comes with cards. So you'll have a character that you play a role of, and you'll have some set of skills or abilities. You may have some equipment or something like that. So a really streamlined kind of concept is, you have a thief, and your thief has a set of lock picks, and you have a backpack with food for 2 days. That could be as simple as what it is. It could be even simpler than that. But that automatically tells you what sort of archetype your character is. They're a thief. Okay, they're a sneaky person. They've got some lock picks. Maybe they're going to pick some locks. Well, let's see. So like that would be the basic concept. You get a handout or some kind of character sheet or something that would help you sort of track that, or you could memorize what I just described. So the next part of this is the way the game typically flows is the game master, the person that I was saying would kind of adjudicate some of this stuff in the story, is they describe some kind of scenario, and then the players just describe what their characters want to do, and based on what's going on in the game, they would describe the results. And so how that works, sort of behind this line here, what the game master has is a bunch of different elements. So they have a story in some particular setting, could be in some story that's happening in ancient Egypt, and they could have locations like pyramids and hidden tombs. They could have non-player characters like like a zombie or something that lives in there that crawls around in the space. And they could have all kinds of encounters and challenges in there. If you could think about a scenario that was like an Indiana Jones or something like that, there could be traps, things that could get set and could go on. And so the game master is describing this environment. Sometimes in the game, you'll see people will draw something out, everything from a quick sketch to a detailed map, sometimes just quick handouts or just a basic description. You can play these type of games very much in a theater of the mind type of style. The more complex the game, the more reliant it might be on things like big battle maps and that kind of thing. But most of the time, it's not required. And so the players have different, objectives, or they want to get, different information. There's items that they want to get. Maybe they heard that the secret key to the tomb of such and such was at the bottom of this pyramid, and so they want to get down there and get this thing. And that may lead them to another adventure, something. Now that they have the key, they want to go back to the place where they started and see if they can open up a secret door somewhere, whatever it is. But the play structure generally just kind of flows like that. What I have labeled down here as the adventure is something that the game master would it would either be something that they would come up with or something that they might purchase. There's some free resources online, or in the case of the one that Step said, this is super normal as kind of a one-pager thing that has like everything that the game master needs. I'm not even clear, like Step, maybe you can indicate on super normal, do you need a game master? Or is that just a game that you can play with just a group of players? Let him kind of pop that in there.
Oh, hey, I didn't realize I could get unmuted. That's cool. You have somebody who's just taken the lead, but that can be whichever person wants to grab the paper and like read it. So it's I guess technically you still need some kind of guide. Yeah.
Okay. All right. But it's pretty simple because it's just a one-page thing.
Yeah, that's right. Everything everyone needs fits on one page.
Okay. So now that I showed you this big, overwhelming, complex graphic, here would be an example of, like I said, there would be some kind of a character sheet or a handout or a card that would be your way of tracking what your character is. We're not going to worry about all of this stuff, but you could see at a glance for this type of game. Somebody, this Tannhauser, the Moros, is a fighter and has a flail and a dagger and some plate armor. So it's probably some kind of burly guy. We can ignore all of this stuff over here on the left for now. What I will describe, though, is there's kind of this notion of sort of task difficulty. In a game like Dungeons and Dragons, they usually range from like 1 to 20 for how hard something is to do. And so when you play the game, you generally just describe what you're doing, as I showed on the previous slide. And then depending on what that is, the game master will determine if you have to hit some kind of target number. And generally what that's made up of is your set of skills, like whatever thing you do well, you're going to kind of bring to bear in the situation, and you're trying to achieve that thing. Sometimes you have to roll dice, other times you don't. But what the game master has to do is determine, okay, based on the difficulty of the thing that you describe that you want to do, is it pretty easy? In which case you probably will succeed. If it's darn near impossible, they may determine that it's just going to fail. You won't be able to do it. You can't jump over the ocean because it's thousands of miles, right? An easy task is, yeah, you can open the door. It has a handle. You just open the door. So we don't have to roll dice all the time or anything. If something is somewhat difficult, or there's a chance that something will fail, we generally, this is when the dice in the game come into play. So that's when all kinds of wacky and random outcomes come out, like whether or not you escape from the trap, or you're able to convince the guy to give you the key, whatever it is. So let's give you like a specific example. So we had our sneaky thief guy, and on our character sheet, we, or in the game, we're actually told like, hey, here's a lock. The door is locked. And so somebody with this character is like, hey, I have a set of lock picks. I'd like to try and pick the lock. And so it's pretty simple then. You might have on the character sheet is it says for lock picking, you get 5 bonus points whenever this guy wants to pick locks. So this is kind of like a skill tied to sort of like numbers. And this is, so there's a chance he could pick the lock. He might not be able to pick the lock. The game master knows that the difficulty of this lock pick is a 15. Okay, so he's pretty good at picking locks, but what we'll do generally is roll a 20-sided die in the game of Dungeons and Dragons and add this bonus to that and see if he can get a 15 and pick the lock. That's pretty much it. some games roll lots of dice, some games roll very little dice, some games roll no dice, some games determine the outcome other different ways. But that's kind of the gist. So now that we kind of have a basic understanding of how these games sort of work, I wanted to go into like really kind of the thing that's even more interesting is how we can use these to kind of build successful teams. So first of all, what does a successful team look like? There are a couple of key elements. People communicate openly and transparently. You know, successful teams and healthy teams, really, they promote ownership and accountability. They delegate tasks, you know, based on strengths. Some people are good at certain things, good at other things. I'll kind of point out that when we go back to sort of relating this to role-playing games, generally you have a team. Different people have different skills and tasks or things within their role that they can kind of bring to bear in the situation. People are, I've got some funny little comments in there too. Okay, so jump over to this. And they support building people in kind of team cohesion. And then also, you know, in a successful team, they have a kind of a culture of like, you know, fostering creativity and trying to kind of innovate, not only in a particular problem scenario, but also within the team. Like, how can we learn from what we did and how can we do things differently? So the other thing that that a successful team does is they kind of reward each other for taking risks. I mean, risks will kind of use sort of lightly here, but you know, you want to take like kind of chances and try things that are different. You want to create a supportive and encouraging environment to do that. So what I want to kind of say is sort of my central thesis is that, you know, what if we had a kind of a sandbox for developing these kinds of skills? What if we could, instead of taking risks in a live production environment, if you're in a tech team, what if we experimented with, you know, how we do risk taking as a team, how we communicate those kinds of things and the chances that we want to take. And so the concept that I want to introduce here is this idea of social play and what behavioral psychologists really kind of talk about, which is really one of the primary ways that children develop their social skills. And there are really like three components. So social play is something which is structured. It's done with others, and it has large elements of pretend. And everyone knows that they're pretending, I think would be the other thing. So we see children learn like this, and those of you who are parents and stuff, you'll see kids come up with like just the weirdest kinds of things because they're pretending and they're learning and they're communicating the strange things that they come up with and stuff. As adults, we have social situations that come up all the time, and we sort of get out of practice with this idea of social play. And you know, we have some areas where we practice, but we're asked to kind of perform in these situations where you know, it's a little bit of a stretch for us. So when we're playing things like games, and particularly I think with a tabletop role-playing game, it allows the players to kind of put on this role, this kind of persona, and then you can kind of exercise it through the game that you're playing. We all know that we're all aware of the structure, you know, quote unquote, the game rules. We're doing things as a team, we're kind of collaborating, and then we're in a pretend situation. We're in a hypothetical environment. And I think the fact that it's a game, we are automatically kind of decoupling it from a hypothetical work situation. And so we're coming up with something different. We're deploying the same kind of sets of skills with each other and how we're relating, but we're doing it in something totally different. So throughout the game's encounters, the things that we're doing in the game, whether it's a room we go into or a new land we explore or a train we're riding on, We are negotiating that environment and working together, and we're developing those skills. And so the game itself becomes kind of a pure space for doing this. So the game requires, sort of imagination. It's going to require like creativity and some sense of adventure, some experimentation and kind of risk taking. These are all things too that really kind of relate to, software development as well. But in the game, as mentioned, we're kind of donning another role. And so we're departing from these everyday roles, and we're learning to fail because there's no real world repercussions, right? We're not in a production environment. We're not in an actual product development situation. There's also some things when departing from these everyday rules where we can give people who have not led before opportunities to lead. We can also, through the experience of playing and collaborating together outside of the structure and roles defined usually by our work, we can see where leadership kind of emerges or new skills that people have opportunities to stretch. And I think this is really kind of an interesting point too, which is, you go into the sandbox environment where you have this pure space to develop these skills. You do learn new ways of communicating with each other because in a game scenario, like I was describing, like a pyramid example or something, you have to communicate with each other about what you see, what you think might be the solution to get through the door or to pass like undetected past the mummy or something like that. Right. So yeah, in the end, you really are learning like new ways of working together. One point which is also interesting about this pure space is that there's real time and then there's game time. So in the real world, we're having to make kind of decisions on a snap. In a game situation like this, we can slow things down where us in the game playing and sort of conversing with each other, we could take minutes and minutes or even an hour trying to decide what the best course of action is. And so we're really drilling in on these kind of communication skills. We're spurring ideas. It almost becomes almost like a mini workshop on kind of ideating and coming up with new ways of thinking about what the appropriate actions of the team might or should be. In game time terms, right, that could be a couple of seconds. Yeah, Anna had that one. This always comes up. You argue about rules for 5 minutes while 6 seconds of your character's time passes. So the fact that you can actually slow down time in game to have the opportunity for your team to work out some details. I played a game one time where I had a bunch of characters. This was several sessions of play, and they were seeking a very bad place, and they found a kind of a portal to like another realm, and they spent about half the session. We spent about an hour and a half of the team sort of like arguing and discussing whether they should go through the portal, whether they had enough information, whether they should go back to the last town that they were at to see if they could learn more before going into this thing. So they were exercising a lot of communication skills. They were sharing information. They were working out all of this stuff while in game. I think the characters came to the edge of the portal and then probably just turned right back around and left. But anyway, it's really kind of a powerful aspect, I think, of role-playing games, is this dimension between real time versus game time. And I'm sure probably in addition to Anna's comment too, like probably anyone that's played role-playing games a lot, they could probably tell you different kinds of stories about how the like dimensionality between sort of game time and real world time has kind of played out and created some really surprising and interesting moments. So I'm going to walk through a game scenario just to kind of have like a little bit of fun for this. So this might be something that you would learn, either see or the game master would describe to you. They might even draw a sketch similar to the one that I have on the page, where you'd be entering the space from below, right? So you open this door and we would say this spacious chamber has marbled floors and a door on each wall. At the far end is a towering granite statue of a man, one hand outstretched, index finger pointed toward you. His eyes are intelligent and his engraved neckline sports amulets and charms. A broadsword hangs on the hip of this 30-foot tall monument. So there's an interesting kind of narrative here, but there's a lot of information here. And I'd like to just pause a moment too, and maybe we can go to the chat, or if you're in a spot where you want to talk, I'd be curious, given the set of circumstances, what anybody might try to do. You know, you don't have to know how to play a game. Just think about if you were in this situation, coming into this place. Now, I didn't give you information about how you got there, but we won't sort of go there. What questions? So you could ask questions of the game master for more information, what you see, what else is kind of going on there. Anyone have any thoughts they want to share on like how they might navigate this situation, or one thing they might try to do? So Anna says, hopefully someone has detect magic. So in like D&D, there's a spell that you can use to detect if there's magic going on. So that might be a one thing. Somebody might try to cast a spell to see if they detect magic. That might yield some information. Step says he wants to climb up and see if he can get the gems. Siandra says, I would investigate for traps. Someone wants to grab the sword. Okay, so so these are some ideas. Let's see sort of what would happen. So if we were playing like, oh, let's see, I specifically skipped investigating for traps. Steph's just going to climb up, doesn't care. Well, actually, before I reveal some of the information, so one, I already know, I'll show you the information that I would know if I was the game master for this. So Step is able to successfully climb up, and he realizes that the gems are actually just part of the statue, but there are some, or the amulets are part of the statue. There's some gems embedded in there, and we may go on to an additional part, have him kind of pick out the gems or something if he wanted the gems. The people cruising around the room investigating for traps, this would be one where there's a chance that they might be able to find the trap, but also the people that start investigating and moving around the room would see one piece of information, which is this statue starts moving and tracking groups of people in the room. Now, I don't think anyone said that they went to go open one of the other doors, but let's see what happens really quick. So this is what the game master kind of knows. And I'm just kind of diving in here to let you know sort of what the flow of it would be. So I described the situation. Players said, hey, this is what I want to try to do. And here's the details. So the people investigating for traps and looking around the room, they might find these scorch marks on the marble floor. And they might say, is there like a pattern to the scorch marks? What's going on? Another bit of detail is that the statue is super heavy. But again, the people investigating, looking for traps, they might find that it's actually on a well-oiled base, that it moves. That might also be revealed to them as they track around the room, as this thing starts to move around. So they'll go look at things specifically. Here's the trigger on the trap. If someone moves to exit the room, the statue starts sending scorching bursts of flame at them. So it's a trap to prevent people from entering the other areas of the space. So then there would be some dice rolls and whatever to see if somebody could avoid getting burned. Step's still like hanging out there up on top of the statue, I would assume. So So this thing continues to sort of launch flames at the characters. So we'll probably have a situation where people are running around the room. Had people, I've played this particular scenario too, where people did investigate for traps and they found the grease sort of base on the statue and were able to wedge something in there to prevent it from moving around. The flame still burst out, but it was unable to target people. And here's an interesting one. You could actually remove the doors from the hinges and use them as a shield. You could also just try to enter one of the rooms and try and get out of there. Here would be another piece of information. There might have been some information in a previous room about the name of the wizard who resembles this statue. And so if somebody said the name of it, then the statue would just stop firing on them. So there's a lot of like different ways to negotiate this space and to kind of resolve the situation. But I like that it's this time for Dimension Door, break his hand off. Okay, yeah, there's some fun like kind of tactical things you could do once the trap was sort of launched. But you could kind of see like there's basic scenario, we're describing the situation. Everyone is sort of describing what they would do. If this were in a real life game situation, I guess the different players, probably each of you that was coming up with ideas might have some conversation about like, well, should we try this or should we try that? Or why don't you go over here and I'll go over there? So there's a lot of fun things that can happen within an environment like this. So let's talk a couple more minutes about like kind of some of the skills that we'd be exercising actually in the game. So there's kind of collaboration and teamwork. We'd be looking at like kind of the diversity of the different player characters in the game. So people are leveraging their individual strengths. Like Anna, for example, mentioned maybe she's playing somebody that has like specific spells that she could use. Somebody might say, hey, I think I'm really good at kind of sneaking around here or doing this. Like I have this idea, right? So collaborating and teamwork, everyone's kind of playing their part. We're kind of relying on each other to kind of, in that situation, to kind of move through the room to survive, to get to the next place. And I'm describing some kind of dangerous sort of scenarios, but there's all kinds of different like encounters that can happen in these games. It doesn't all have to be, you know, traps and fireballs and combat and stuff. Some people like that stuff. Some people like games where you're negotiating and finding clues to mysteries and that kind of thing. So we're still exercising the same skills no matter what. We've got to come up with like innovative ways to solve problems. You could see in the one that I described where you could stack a solution. Somebody starts with trying to look around to see if there's something kind of trapped. They might find the greased base that the statue is in, and they might work with someone else to kind of figure out like, hey, maybe there was that, you know, spear in the previous room that we could kind of get in there and kind of wedge there to keep the statue from moving around. So this like kind of collaborating and coming up with like innovative solutions to help you know, move through something. So it's a lot of like, you know, spitballing. You have these kind of curveballs and sticky situations that you have to get through. And then, you know, we see this too, like in games where people come up with different solutions to a problem and they'll try to think about like, what's the best one? I always like it's fun when someone thinks they have the best solution and they just go ahead and try and do it. And the other player's like, no, like don't run in that room. And then we have to deal with, you know, secondary results of whatever it was that they did. And, you know, you realize that like conflict isn't always the answer. Sometimes you're overwhelmed by whatever the situation is, whether it's a monster or a fast moving car or a cannon or whatever the threat is that you have to deal with. It's not always best to go and engage the threat head on. The illusion or sort of the scenario in a lot of these games is whether it's like fear of death or loss of sanity or, you know, navigating, losing yourself at sea or something like that. You're conscious of like results of failed actions. And so back to the whole game time thing versus real time, slowing things down in order to kind of resolve that. There's a lot of like kind of empathy that can be taught and learned through these kind of like thought experiments that happen in a game. You can engage socially in an environment, and maybe you're negotiating a peace between two warring factions or something, and you learn some detail about the history between the two. And you can get pretty immersive in these types of games where now you've got to determine like, okay, well, who is really the threat in this situation and who is in the right? So a lot of interesting discussion can happen in game and like learning empathy this way. And, you know, just to kind of connect this all the way down to like where my own curiosity sort of led me to the game itself, you know, kind of immersion in the scenario really activates like curiosity. You have to ask yourself questions about, well, wait, what's going on here? Do I have all the right information? What's happening? You know, you kind of free yourself of like your own kind of rehearsed kind of narratives about things. And you have to kind of step away, especially in a scenario where you are out of your element, right? Like you're an astronaut stuck on a strange planet with like bizarre aliens and rare threats and limited oxygen, right? So I don't have a script to go off of. So I have to kind of like, you know, do like in the movie and the book, The Martian, to come up with like creative solutions, learn things about your environment, what you have at your disposal in order to make good out of the situation. Let's see. All right, so wanted to kind of tie this into like engineering just a little bit, and like what does it mean to use a game like this to kind of practice being a better engineer. You're exercising your brain. Again, you're using your brain, but you're not you know, under the threat of like a failed deployment or something, right? You can create and immerse yourself into crazy situations, find different solutions for things. This is really just, you know, active practice at the same sets of skills that we use in engineering, and a lot of even outside of engineering. You know, teams benefit from these kinds of things. You're exercising your kind of mathematical skills. You're thinking about, you know, well, what's the probability of this? Like an example that I shared with the lock picking thing, somebody might think, well, my character has a high probability of succeeding on this thing, so I would like to try this. You might have a discussion with somebody else on your team about the risks, right? Well, okay, but if you open the lock, what's on the other side of that door? Or is opening the door going to trigger a trap? Is someone following us? So you're negotiating these different things to really kind of work out how your brain works. There's some really cool soft skills. I think explaining to each other, learning how to articulate intentions and communicating clearly. That's a really important kind of team skill. And in a game environment, you have the opportunity to kind of exercise that and speak up where you maybe say the new person on the team in real life, and maybe it's a little, you haven't felt really sort of free necessarily to kind of speak up about things and articulate yourself. And share your thoughts. I think this is, again, kind of tying it back to the idea of like what makes a successful team in general is, you know, having this ability where there's a high level of communication. At Integral, we talk about XP, extreme programming, and I think just going to kind of run through these. Like, there's some really cool sort of values that are part of XP and philosophically that are really kind of aligned with what we can do in a game environment that can exercise these skills, right? It's all about incremental planning. We're collaborating and relying on each other. We're given sets of constraints and we're trying to address them head on, recognize them and communicate about them. You have, you know, you're part of a team. You have to have clarity about what your goals are and what sort of action plan that you're taking. and needs change, right? Like you could be playing in a game, same as in the real world, when you're exercising some of these XP values, you're kind of constantly coping with a changing situation, whether it's information that you're acquiring along the way, a place that you go to in the game. We're exercising these same skill sets. We're also trying to divorce ourselves of like old habits that aren't really serving us, and being open about that as well. And oh, I like the mobbing statement. I've got something fun here on my next slide. So really, it's individual contribution to the team's goals. So we're exercising a lot of XP values in a game setting. Here's kind of a fun list of kind of agile analogs. Just kind of picking out a few of them. I mean, these aren't like hard and fast. I was kind of kicking around like ideas about these where there's some like interesting analogs and similarities in a game environment where, for example, you have a product or a project that you're kind of working on is kind of very similar to like an adventure that you're trying to kind of work through together. It's a collection of challenges required to solve a problem. Let's see. Okay, Michael Wolf showed some at-work games. I'm going to go through the other questions here in just a moment. Here are a couple other benefits. It's a fun way to blow off steam. You can socialize with your team members and coworkers. It kind of brings people together. You could play a game that doesn't rely on people that are in your immediate team. It could be somebody that's in a different department. You learn about kind of what they do, their challenges. I mean, it's a game, right? It's a social situation. And so you're going to have conversations about work and life, and you get to know the humans that you work with. So you'll just learn lots of things sort of both in and out of game, like about, who they are and the way they think. And hopefully, stories that you'll kind of tell for years and years. There are some really interesting therapeutic benefits. I'll kind of share a link here if you want to kind of learn more. There's been a lot of recent sort of research on using role-playing games, and there's actually, certifications in therapy about using game concepts like we're doing here to help people with mental health issues that could be, emotional related. They could have like inner fears and anxieties that they want to kind of explore in a safe setting, and a game helps them do that. And you can experiment with, different facets of identity. There's a lot of interesting work going on in therapy, like kind of using games. So there's a lot of credence to like exercising skills in a safe environment like we described here. Here's just some fun photos of like some folks that I've played with and stuff too, including some engineers at another company that I worked at. So here's sort of next steps for y'all. I would explore if you're curious about it. Let's see. Oh, Michael said, stories you'll tell for years. We had those in a breakout room team celebration. Oh, hush, don't tell them it was a team building exercise. So yeah, there's lots of different games. I could kind of put some shots of a variety of games. Some require a GM, some don't. Some have lots of dice and math, and some just have really simple stuff like cards or whatever. So there's lots of different like mechanical ways to kind of play these types of games. I just showed you kind of like one set of common, sort of a common flow, but like how some of these things get resolved. Some games cost nothing. Some cost a little bit of money, but they'll oftentimes publish like a limited set of free rules to kind of give you an easy start. There's lots of kind of free content out there. And again, it doesn't have to be like your hobby. It could just be something fun like the one that Step mentioned, which is just, something different for your game night with your friends or your colleagues. Some things have a little bit more difficulty in regards to doing them remotely, but like I had said earlier on, like many games have like a way of playing that is very much theater of the mind and doesn't really require anything than maybe just like a Zoom call or something like that. Yeah, so a couple of comments here about playing. Yeah, So there's a lot of different games out there. Adventure Zone is a great one for kids. This is kind of like a card-based role-playing game that doesn't require a game master. It has some different situations and events that come up, and the players have to kind of decide how they want to sort of play through different situations. All right, that is it. I've got a bunch of other resources that I'll share kind of in the deck. But thank you. I wanted to see in the last couple minutes if people have any other kind of questions or comments. I'll go to the chat to see if I missed something too.